back to Wild and Free Art. This is Alora here, and today, in continuing my Scraps of Trash to Treasure challenge, we're going to turn this Little Wendy's Kids Activity Booklet into this. A beautiful pocket type journal with lots of goodies inside it. Stay tuned and I'll show you how I did it. When we went to Wendy's and my kids ordered their equivalent of the Happy Meal, children's meal, they got this little activity pack, and after they finished fiddling around with it, they were ready to throw it away. But of course, Mommy saw potential in that, and I decided that I was going to make something with it. So now is that day. The first thing I am trying to do is to get rid of the stickers that don't want to come off, so I just trimmed the excess over the edge. And I am inspired for the color scheme and the theme by that nice strip of green paper that says Wild and Free, which was sent to me in some Happy Mail from the lovely Monica in my group. And I thought it was just perfect because that's the name of the channel, and I absolutely loved it. So the first thing I did was I trimmed off the little handles because I wasn't really planning on using them. And then I just rounded all the corners, top and bottom ones. My next step was to actually flip it upside down because I wanted to use that little crayon holder as like a closure for it. And I had to think about how to use it and decided that I was going to turn it into pockets of some kind. So I just used some glue to glue the bottom parts of the accordion together in order to then make it into pockets of some kind later on. I did this kind of creation, let's say intuitively. I had a rough idea, but I just kind of let it create itself based on what inspired me and what caught my eye as I worked. So I didn't really have a plan, to be honest, when I started. It was a very vague plan. I knew that I also wanted to put a signature in the book, and I happened to receive a parcel which had this perfect packing paper in it that was perforated, so I was able to easily rip it up and use it to make the pages. So what I did was, after separating the different levels of it, I folded it in half and cut it down to size to fit in the middle fold, valley fold of my little book that I was trying to make. I wanted to round the corners as well, but the paper was still too crinkly, so I decided to go off screen and to give it a quick iron so that it would lay flatter and be easier to cut. So after I had ironed it and it laid a bit flatter for me, I decided it was time to round the corners. So I took my punch and I rounded all four corners of the signature pages because I wanted them to kind of match the cover of the book. And then the next thing I did was, to add some interest, I decided to ink the edges of the pages, alternating a brown and a green, because of course green will be the predominant color since I'm being inspired by that strip of paper that says Wild and Free on it. The next step was to find things to put on top of those pockets. So I took out various books that I had and I found pages that I thought would be interesting based on what was on this strip of paper. So I found a goldfinch because there was one on there, and I found pink flowers because we had pink flowers on there. I reinforced the edges with some washi tape, which also kind of got rid of that bright green kind of color. And then I just kind of went really intuitively as to how I wanted this to go. I looked through my fabric scraps and found some bits that I thought would fit in, and then I started cutting paper to size. A lot of this was playing around, so I was just kind of trying to echo a lot of things while bringing that into the images that I had chosen. So here I rounded the corners, and of course, because I used the brown Distress Oxide ink to edge the other things, I thought it would be a good way to edge that as well and tone down the blue because the page wasn't quite a perfect fit. And that's okay because I wanted it to still be seen that it was a piece of reused and recycled, you know, paper that I had taken this piece of junk and I've turned it into something else. So the next step I did was to also ink the image from the book that I had. And then, because I'm not a huge fan of shiny, I decided to distress it a little bit. The paper is quite thick, so I knew it would hold up to being sanded. So I just gave it a light sanding, which created a few lines and scratches on the image and made it a little bit less perfect, which is exactly the look I was after. I also knew I kind of wanted to make a tuck spot on this page. I wanted to make sure I could really fill this little journal with goodies in lots of different ways and surprises. So I started looking for material that I could use in order to create this tuck spot, but without interrupting the image too much. I didn't want to block those flowers because I thought they looked really nice. So I looked through one of my other magazines that you've seen me use before, that I have in my bag, and I played around with ribbon and I tried paper until I found the combination that just seemed to work, which wasn't really a combination at all in the end. Once I was happy, I finally glued it down and got to work on the next part, which was going to become a pocket, so I had to keep that in consideration, even though, as you'll see, I didn't do quite the best job with measurements. I knew I wanted to use book page as the background, so I cut one down that had a lot of text, and I knew I wanted to use a bird, so I cut out one of the birds from the pages that I pulled out of my bird book, and I began working on putting it together. I knew I wanted to knock back the print of the book, so I used some white gesso, and then I added a bit of gold splatter because there was some gold in the strip and in the butterfly that I also wanted to use on the cover. I took a break from filming at this point because it was late and it was the next day now, and I have finished fussy cutting the bird how I want it. And off screen I did play a little bit with the layout so as to create something that I wanted, because this video was already getting a lot longer than I had planned. It was a long process to transform this little piece of trash here. So at this point, I'm just basically gluing down my lace scrap that I chose to have the bird sit on, and I found these little flowers that I had received kindly in some Happy Mail and thought that they would reflect what's on that strip a little bit more as well, because they look quite similar. So I added those in too. I then moved on to the center spread next, and this one I knew I wanted it to be a continuous piece because this is also where the signatures are going to be sewn. The signature, just the one, is going to be sewn in. So I've wanted to use this napkin for a really long time, and this was the perfect chance to use it. I got book page again as the background, and I cut it down to size again, just like I did before, to try and get as much of the text as possible. I inked it and I glued it down, and then I took half of the napkin in order to get the flowers on the bottom bit, and I separated the layers, which took far too long trying to do it with my fingers until I gave up and did the 2 pieces of tape system, which of course worked instantly after the 10 minutes I spent trying to do it myself. Um, After that, once I had that, I laid it all down and I glued it down using my matte varnish. You can use matte medium, you can use Mod Podge, you can use PVA, whatever you like, but I like using the matte because, of course, I don't like shiny things. I then left it to dry overnight. The next morning, I used sandpaper around the edges just to get the last of the napkin off. It just makes it easier and it adds a nice texture to it. After having gotten everything all cleaned up on the edges, I knew I wanted to put a butterfly in the middle, and so I had this big butterfly sticker, and I cut the body in half, putting one half on one side and the other half on the other, remembering that there's going to be the signatures in between. So when you open it, it'll have one side of the butterfly's wings, and when you finish working through the signature, then you've got the other side of the butterfly. So I just peeled it off, used some glue to make it stronger, and I also put a little bit of varnish on top of it because, again, this is plastic sticker, and I didn't want the shininess, so the varnish kind of gave it a little bit of a matte look. So the next step after I finished the center part was to do the last 2 pages. I basically repeated kind of what I had done on the previous ones. So my first page was a flower, so my last page was flowers, and then my second last page is a book page with a bird on it. I chose the goldfinch, I cut it out, and I decided to make it into a belly band after I had played around with a few of the layouts. I used a paper doily, a piece of ribbon that I just glued down, and glued everything onto it, but it didn't stay. I don't know why, even though I used fabric glue and everything, it just wouldn't stick. So I ended up hand stitching along the entire top and bottom of that page, and as well as hand stitching the actual bird into position on that doily. You'll see me do that in a bit later on. The next thing I did was I wanted to make something more on that flower page, and I didn't want to ruin or block the image because I liked it. So I decided to use a belly band, but I used a piece of plastic from plastic packaging. So I cut it out, measured a strip, sanded the edges carefully because plastic can be quite sharp, and I also rounded the corners so that there wouldn't be any scratching or any injuries, let's say, when trying to take something in and out of the belly band. After I finished sewing, I decided it was time to punch the holes for the pockets. So I tried with my large hole punch. I found the center, marked it, and then I tried to go through it with the punch. But the cardstock was too thick, so unfortunately I wasn't able to. But it did leave a mark enough for me to try and follow. So I had to use my craft knife to cut it out as carefully as I could. And I repeated the same thing with the other page, um, with the other half of the butterfly. So both sides with the bird on one side, the butterfly on the other. And I also cut the top part of the pocket to the edges to make it easier to open. My next step was to sew in the signatures. So I positioned them and I simply did a 3-hole pamphlet stitch, and I kept the strings on the inside because I might want to add like some little dangles or decorations or some beads to them to add some more interest in the future. I didn't do it, but it is a thought that I have had to do, so I might go back and do that at another time. With the inside of the book finished, it's time to start working on the outsides. The first thing I did was work on my flap. I basically folded it up, marked with a pencil how wide the book was, and then I scored it so that it would close properly. I then cut off the excess bits from the flap, and here you're going to see me start playing around with how I wanted the cover to go and experimenting all the different ways until I figured out something that I thought would work in this case. After experimenting, I decided that the best thing would be to actually cut that strip into 2 pieces and put those on the actual cover itself. Um, and then move the butterfly in a different location. So I played with it a bit, I positioned it, I figured out what I wanted to do and decided that the butterfly would go on the flap. Then I needed to think about a closure, and so I played with some magnets that I had, and I found one that was super strong, so strong. And I put a washer that I then glued to the you'll see that I then glue it onto the cover, and I glue the magnet to the inside of the flap. If I were to do this again, I would have probably glued the magnet to the top of the flap under the butterfly because the magnet is so strong that I struggle to take it apart from the washer, and I have to get in there with my fingers to separate it. So that is something that I might go in and actually fix, at, off screen, when I come back. And so, yeah, so if you do that, I suggest checking that first. If you have a really strong magnet, make sure that there's a layer in between, or else you're going to end up ripping your washer off of your cover. Used book page for both the inside and out for the flap and the back cover and spine cover of the book, and then glued on the strip of paper cut in half on top of everything. I used a piece of washi tape behind it in order to line up the 2 parts of the paper to reduce the gap as much as possible. And I did also do a little border of the same green washi tape that I used inside the book, just because the edge didn't, the cover piece didn't quite reach the edges. I left everything to dry under a weight overnight, and then off screen I glued on the magnet and hand stitched the rest of the pages. I figured this was getting to be quite long, and you didn't need to see me sit there and stitch everything. So yes, for everything, I pre-punched everything with the awl and then just did a running stitch all the way around, except for the two pockets where I only did the top and bottom. Now I'm just finishing everything up by gluing on the butterfly, which I might now remove to put the magnet on. But once I set that all aside and I started working on some bits to put inside all the tuck spots and the pockets, I am not going to really, walk you through this. I'm going to speed up the video now and maybe put some music on so you can just watch me make them, because or else this video is going to become even longer. And then I'll be back when we do the final flip through of the journal as it was at the time of filming, and then we'll see what you think. And here we are, all finished. My battery did die at a certain point, which is why you don't really see the rest of me making the bits for it. But here you can see where I'm kind of struggling to open it without ripping the washer off. So that is why I've come to the conclusion that I am going to move the magnet or the washer, one of the two. So here we are on the first page. I've made some little tags to put in that first tuck spot there. And in the first pocket, I just kept that quite simple. Anyone can add embellishments or whatever to it if I decide that that's going to be given away. I'm not sure. I added a few little stickers into the pages, keeping them simple so that there's lots of space for journaling and creating. One of each thing, part of the theme. The next little pocket is this one here that you see me make this lovely little tag. And then behind the bird belly band, I've just got a little tag and a little bit of ephemera. And in the invisible belly band, I just have a sticker and the little specimen card. And I can add more things to it, but this was just an example, and that is it. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and see you soon.